It's the most wonderful time of the year. Welcome into another episode of Battery Power. Cory McCartney and Grant McAuley with you here to break down the Braves division series against the Brewers of Grant. We're obviously going to flip the script from the regular season to the postseason, but I think somewhere in SunTrust Park, Guillermo Heredia is still celebrating.
You can't rule that out. He seems to be a man who enjoys a good cigar, and as a native of Cuba, I think he could be the Braves cigar expert or aficionado if you're scoring at home. And hopefully in this March through October, over the next 3-4 weeks, the Braves will have quite a few occasions to smoke another cigar.
I want to call this series the Hank Aaron Invitational. Of course, the Braves are the franchise with which Aaron penned his legacy. When you think about Milwaukee, where things got started, the Brewers, with whom he played his final games, almost a fitting legacy to Aaron in the year in which we lost him. When you look at this series, the Braves needed until the next to the last series of the season to win the National League East again. The Brewers absolutely ran away with the Central. How much in your mind does momentum matter going into the postseason?
Well, momentum's always going to play a part. You did talk about the Brewers' relative ease, I guess you could call it, of clinching the National League Central. The Braves did have to fight it out, and they had to retool their entire team around the trade deadline just to get to the point where they're at. But when we talk about momentum, the old adage goes, it's only as good as the next day's starting pitcher. The Brewers are going to be throwing 3 very good starting pitchers at the Braves in the first 3 games of this series. The good news is the Braves have a couple of very good starters to counteract those in games 1 and game 2. And I think the Braves, offensively speaking, have been hitting on all cylinders a little bit more often this year, especially in the last couple of months, than the Brewers have. So I'm interested to see how these two teams match up when it comes to the strength of the Braves being more offense. The strength of the Brewers, I think, it's no surprise. It's the starting pitching in large part that has carried them to this point.
Yeah, so starting rotation, lineup, bullpen, we're going to get into all of it as we break down this series. And Grant, as we dive into these offenses, the Braves and Brewers are nearly identical in Fangraphs WAR. The Braves have hit a little collectively higher towards league average than the Brewers have. The Braves obviously a lot more home runs. You could almost say this Brewers offense modest to say the least.
Yeah, they're quite modest might be a better way of putting it. And if you really look at these two teams when it comes to the power perspective, the run production perspective, everything favors the Braves. And even though their wins above replacement might look a little bit closer, let's look at what's been happening over the last month or so. I pulled the stats when it comes to September. The Braves overall hitting .251, 144 runs scored, 7th in the National League in Fangraphs WAR. The Brewers, meanwhile, .229, only 120 runs scored, 12th in the National League in Fangraphs wins above replacement, and the only playoff team to be ranked that low, as you might imagine as well. But when it comes to just offensive firepower, the Atlanta Braves have been doing it at a better clip, certainly since the trade deadline, than the Milwaukee Brewers have, perhaps at any time this year.
Clearly the edge then in their favor?
I would give the edge to the Atlanta Braves when it comes to offense. It may not be a chasm between the two teams, but the Braves just seem to have 1 through 8, a little bit more power, a little bit more consistency in what they can expect when it comes to scoring runs.
I agree with you. I think the Braves had the edge here. There's some scary things, though, about this Brewers team. Right now, Willy Adames is the only guy hitting above 15% above league average on this team, but you've got Christian Yelich, obviously a former MVP who's having another down year. You've got Jackie Bradley Jr., who was a big pickup for them, who's been a negative WAR player. So some kind of dangerous territory there when you think about those guys and what could happen as things flip to the postseason. But this Braves team, I mean, you're talking about the 3rd most home runs in the majors. You've got 2 MVP candidates in Austin Riley and Freddie Freeman. That power-rich outfield that's been retooled and has hit the most home runs of any outfield since the trade deadline. So I agree with you. I think things could get interesting with those pieces not performing as of yet with the Brewers, but I think clearly things weigh in the Braves' favor.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Atlanta's 2nd in home runs in the National League, 3rd in runs scored. The Brewers 8th in home runs, 6th in runs scored. So offensively speaking, that seems to be the one advantage the Braves can bring into this series that could bode very well.
The strength of this Brewers team clearly starting pitching. They lead the majors in rotational WAR. I mean, Corbin Burns. I mean, this guy in my mind, the National League Cy Young, a front runner, a 1.62 FIP, which is the best since Pedro Martinez in the divisional era. Then you add in Brandon Woodruff and Freddie Peralta. This group is extremely deep and extremely potent when it comes to starting pitching.
They absolutely are. In all respect to Jacob deGrom, who just rolls out of bed and he's a Cy Young front runner most years, I think that this is a Corbin Burns kind of year when it comes to that. And when it comes to what the Braves are going to have to do in order to win some of these games and beat some of these top-level starters, they're going to have to slay a couple of dragons at least as they look to bring this series home, hopefully in a good place by that time. But when it comes to Corbin Burnes and Brandon Woodruff, you can go through all the stats. It's superbly impressive. These are guys that, along with Freddie Peralta, they're no stranger to strikeouts. They're averaging at least 10.5 strikeouts per 9, and in the case of both Burnes and Peralta, over 12, nearly 13 strikeouts per 9. The Braves offense, I think, has the power, though, to counteract that. And if you're looking for something as kind of a positive, if you're a Braves fan, or just the Braves in general, as they look big picture at this series, they have roughed up both Burnes and Woodruff before this year. But Freddie Peralta is a bit of an X factor. He's more unheralded than the other two, but I think it's been, at times at least, every bit as good as his rotation mates.
When we look at the Braves rotation, I mean, this is why Charlie Morton came to Atlanta.
No
doubt. This is why you go out and get this guy, the Game 1 starter. He's been there. He's been in the World Series for the Rays. This is a guy who knows what it takes to be successful on this stage. Max Fried, meanwhile, has the best ERA in the majors after the All-Star break. Really interested, though, in Ian Anderson this series. Yeah. I mean, last year you're talking about historical dominance from him in a guy that had made that many starts in his career. It was fantastic. He did look really good against the Brewers earlier this season, so I think he could be a really interesting factor in this.
He really is. When I talk about Peralta being an X factor for the Braves rotation, I think the same could be said for Ian Anderson, even if the numbers don't match exactly, because let's flash back to 2020 when Ian Anderson made 4 postseason starts, was 2-0 with an ERA under 1, was piling up a lot of strikeouts himself. But I think you hit the nail on the head. The Braves signed Charlie Morton to front their rotation in the postseason, to have someone to put alongside Max Fried. Both men won 14 games this year in the regular season. You might not care a whole lot about wins and losses, but it's good to see the guys were on the mound when the Braves were winning, and nobody was doing that more than Max Fried. In his 11 starts since August the 1st, the Braves won 10 of those, and opponents were hitting well below 200 against Fried, who had a sub-150 ERA. He was dominant down the stretch. While Morton might be that horse that you had to bring in, go out and get, have a little reunion with, Max Fried's every bit as important as Charlie Morton is, and they're going to be going against, as we discussed, very tough pitchers in Corbin Burnes and Brandon Woodruff.
The Braves pitchers, I mean, you could argue, have better postseason resumes going into this. Who in your mind has the edge here in starting pitching?
I will give the edge, it's closer than you might think, to the Milwaukee Brewers as far as this is concerned, because I do think that they have the National League Cy Young Award winner on their staff, and they have 2 extremely good, if you want to call it 1A, 1B, and 1C options, they've kind of got that going. So I would give them a bit of an edge over a Brave staff that does have more postseason experience and has a veteran and one of the better pitchers that you'll find in the second half, rolling right into October, pitching extremely well.
Yeah, 3 starters is all you need in the postseason.
It really
the Brewers
is.
had that in spades. I give them the edge here as well. When you look at these bullpens, the Braves have the 3rd best bullpen ERA since the All-Star break. The Brewers are 16th in that category, but they have Josh Hader, and that may be the difference.
It very well could. If we're sizing up these 2 bullpens and talking about who has the advantage, I think it's a push. And more so because Josh Hader is that X factor. He's the one weapon that the Braves just don't have an answer for. But when it comes to, I think, the depth of the Braves relief corps against the Brewers relievers, I think that the Braves can match up, and even though it's been an adventure in the 9th inning for Will Smith, there are some big outs that have to happen before you even get to the 9th, and then of course the Braves offense is going to have a say in this series as well. So if you're looking at big picture stuff, you may be kind of surprised to know that the Braves have been so good in the bullpen of late just because of the interesting final 3 outs, but I think that this group, by and large, is a little bit better than it gets credit for sometimes.
We have to dive into these Josh Hader numbers just because they're just so ridiculous.
Do we really, though?
Both righties and lefties, both collectively hitting under 127 against him. It gets crazier when you think about the fastball. A .97 batting average against his fastball this season. Obviously, you've got 15.45 Ks per 9. I mean, this guy is the best reliever in baseball, and ultimately, it may come down to what the Braves can do against him in some critical moments in this series.
It very well might, and if you're looking for a guy that could be getting that 4 or 5 out save, 2-inning save, if it comes down to that for the Brewers, I think they're going to be asking Josh Hader to do an awful lot. But the good thing for them is they're able to cover for that bullpen by hopefully having their starters extend a little bit more. I think we'll see that from Corbin Burnes, Brandon Woodruff, Freddie Peralta. Those are guys that I think they might leave in there to work a little bit more rather than giving those quick hooks that you sometimes see in the postseason. At least that's how I read it right now. So the strength of the starting rotation can also be a strength for the bullpen as well. But when it comes down to sizing these 2 up side by side, I really think it's a push.
Well, I think you have to factor in the fact that Devin Williams isn't going to be in the series. I mean,
absolutely.
Him and Huascar, might want to hang together and maybe talk about things not to do with your pitching hand. But, this guy, absolutely dominant, that airbender pitch. They're now going to look to Brent Suter and Brad Boxberger to kind of fill that role as the setup man. I think that drop down is ultimately something that could be very much in the Braves' favor.
Yeah, if we were talking about a bullpen where they had both Williams and Hader, I would give the Brewers the edge. And it still might be close, but I would give them the edge in the bullpen as well. I don't know what it is about the walls in Milwaukee that looks so good, or I guess the bench in the case of Huascar Noah, but either way, something might have been happening at that time that for Devin Williams, it's just one of those things he's going to have to relive for a long period of time, because this is not when you want to lose one of your big bullpen weapons, and the Brewers are going to have to find a way to overcome that. And having Josh Hader around helps, but it's going to be asked a lot of these other guys to come in, step up, and hopefully get some big outs for them.
So you go push in this category.
I do.
I'm going with the Brewers because they have the best player on either one of these bullpens. So to me, I think the Brewers get the edge in terms of the bullpens. It's prediction time, and to me, Grant, this thing is very simple. Can this potent Braves offense do enough against what's collectively a top 3 Brewers pitching staff?
That's the big question, and I do think that this Braves team has been studying for this pop quiz all season long. They have gotten better and better and better, beginning with the trade deadline when they rebuilt their outfield. And then, of course, you've got a historically powerful infield as well. And while you are going to see 3 ace-caliber pitchers for the Brewers, when you think about Burns, Woodruff, and Peralta, well, the Braves are coming in with postseason success on their side last year. They got to the National League Championship Series. They have the reigning MVP. They have an MVP candidate. They have 2 more infielders just in that group of 4 that have had postseason moments in the past. And then you think about Soler, Duvall, Rosario, Peterson, that rebuilt outfield. That's the strength that the Braves need. They're going to have to lean on that run-scoring ability if they want to topple this Brewers pitching staff and advance into the National League Championship Series yet again.
To me, everything about the Braves is post-deadline. And post-deadline, only 6 teams have scored more runs than the Braves have. The Brewers are 16th in run production during that time period. So to me, we talk about momentum and how long it took you to get to the postseason and the fight for the Braves that lasted until the next to the last series of the season. To me, it's also about momentum in what these players are doing collectively. And it's hard to dispute that the Braves have been a much hotter team than the Brewers squad that's really been struggling since mid-September. So to me, I think ultimately the Braves take this thing and they do it in 5 games.
Yeah, I think that the Braves are the team to beat in this series. Again, it may be a bit of a push. The starting pitching for the Brewers is extremely good. I think the Braves offense ultimately is too much. And when you do talk about what these 2 clubs are doing down the stretch, the Braves came into the final week of the season with a 2.5-game lead in the National League East and a team in Philadelphia that wanted to topple them and push this thing all the way to the last day of the season. And what happened? The Braves swept that series. They've already played what I feel like is a perfect tune-up for a postseason series, the likes of which they're about to see against Milwaukee. I'm going to go Braves in 4. They're going to have to rough up either Burns or Woodruff, I believe, and then bring this thing home to Truist Park so they can celebrate on their home field with a victory in 4 games.
You could make the case that the Braves have been playing postseason baseball for a month. So
you could.
We'll see how that plays into this series. Things get started Friday in Milwaukee, and we'll have you covered the entire way here on Battery Power. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube, turn on those notifications to get all the latest episodes. I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley. Until next time, Braves Country.